Hi everybody, it's Erin Scott here. We're going to be talking about the upcoming Mercury retrograde cycle that we're going to be moving into on the 16th of February for some of us. In some cases, depending on where you're located, it's going to be the 17th. There's a few things to talk about here. So this will be at least a half an hour video, if not a little bit longer. I'm just going to see where it goes. My Venus video went kind of long the other day, but it was full of potent information. For those of you who haven't seen the Venus process, our annual cycle for Venus, I recommend popping into it at some point, okay? Let me take a little sip of my water. Couple things that I want to point out. So we're going to be talking about this Mercury retrograde, but it's aligned with another process astrologically. So we're going to be talking about all that. I just want to point out this image that I have up specifically for this analysis. You know, we have the cloudy sky here, but this beautiful castle here is, I think it's pronounced Bamborough. It's just south, essentially, of Edinburgh. And so I'm thinking that, I think it's up in Yorkshire here. So because this is pronounced Edinburgh, I'm assuming this is Bamborough. Some of you who are UK folks, you can, correct me if I'm wrong. But Bamborough Castle, just stunning. Oops, let's see. Anyway, this is the location that we're looking at here, right? And I thought this image was so perfectly appropriate, certainly for Mercury retrograde in Pisces, which we're going to be talking about, all right? The other thing that I want to point out, everybody, is that I have a few sales going on. So if you go to my website, elscott.org, at the bottom of this page, you'll find the services, and you can tap in for those interested in some sales that are currently going on, okay? All right, now let's go ahead and close this one out. In fact, let's close that out. All right, let's take a look here. Now, I have to tell you, one of the things that I saw kind of almost immediately was the 10-degree Venus trining the 11-degree moon, squaring the 12-degree Mercury retrograde. So we have 10, 11, and 12. Nothing too spectacular about it. It certainly does speak to progression. It speaks to a link. It speaks to steps moving toward something. And when we're talking about Venus in Aries, what we're talking about is, number one, a new value Venus of the self, Aries. We're talking about a new ethic or an ethos that the self identifies and resonates with. When we're talking about this new creative inspiration, this new ethical alignment, this new sense of self-value, it's trining the moon up here at 11 in Sagittarius. What matters is the truth. At 11, what we're looking at here is enlightenment. So what's going to matter, the imprinting, essentially what we're looking at with this particular chart, which is the point, the exact time at which Mercury stations retrograde, this is the signature then of the process that it will be going through, okay? With the moon at 11 degrees Sag, what matters is the truth and indeed to be some sort of vehicle of enlightenment. The interesting thing is it's squaring Mercury, which is now going to be stationing retrograde at this 12 degrees 53 minutes Pisces. And it's conjunct Neptune, right? So we have this beginning point of this retrograding process, 5 degrees within a 5-degree orb of Neptune. And importantly, it's within a 7-degree orb of Black Moon Lilith. This is pretty intense. And the square to the moon, the signature of the beginning of this process of Mercury retrograde, is going to be imbued with this particular signature. And the square of the mind to the moon, the desire for truth, the desire for an up-leveling, 11. Squaring, having a difficult or contentious relationship with the deluded, wounded mind. Existentially in Pisces. So at a very kind of deep existential level, there can be self-delusion, wounded self-delusion that plays out in the mind. This can lead to depression and all kinds of different spiraling processes that we as individuals and indeed the collective can go through. So what else does this show? Well, it also shows the square between the desire for truth, the desire to be somebody like a beacon of light, and the squaring to this Neptune Mercury also can look like creative expression at a new level of mental creativity, visual creativity, videos, films, storylines, narratives. Now, could that be for some emotional lying because of this Neptune Mercury with Lilith? See, that's the key here. Just with Mercury conjunct Neptune, everybody, this can look like delusion. It can also look like high levels of creativity. It can also look like the musical mind, the mind that can interpret and understand sound, frequency, vibration, music, the language of story, the language of film, the language of sound. Okay, so there's a high level of psychic ability accessing, naturally getting catalyzed from this conjunction point of the retrograded mind. Now, the thing about Mercury retrograde during the cycle, which, by the way, let's talk about those dates. Let me pull it up with my ephemeris here. So Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde on the 16th of February, Eastern US time, and it's going to be stationing direct on March 10th. March 10th, okay? And it will be stationing direct at 28 degrees Aquarius, 28 degrees, 13 minutes Aquarius, okay? So that's the time frame that we're looking at here. But you have to understand that with this particular conjunction, there are multiple functions and multiple ways of operating that will be catalyzed. 1, high creativity. 2, a new level of creative expression, a new level of accessing creative impetus and flow. We're also going to be, again, able to psychically tune in. Now, is that psychic function going to be interrupted or skewed, if not mindful, because of Black Moon Lilith's location? Yes, absolutely. There's no question. There's no question. Especially because this Black Moon Lilith here, which is the functionality of devaluation. So the mind living in a myth or a fantasy or a delusion or a sense of confusion, Neptune, with Lilith, which is I'm not valuable, or God, life itself, karma, life is not on my side. Karma is, I don't know, not on my side. That's what Lilith on the mind and Neptune can do. And the sextile here, the blue line between Black Moon Lilith and Mars at a newly entered Capricorn point. See, what's going to be happening is the morning of the 16th of February, Mars enters Capricorn. And it makes this particular Mercury retrograde process all the more potent because we have 2 planets activated on that particular day. The fact is that Mars moving into Capricorn, which by the way is going to be happening, Let me tell you the exact time. It's going to be happening on February 16th, Sunday, Eastern Time, and it's going to be happening at 6:33 a.m. Okay? So, what is this Mercury retrograde being imprinted with? A newly entered Mars into Capricorn ruled by Saturn. Mars ruled by Saturn at 16 degrees. Now, this can show up, this can manifest differently for different people. It depends on the person, it depends on their signature, their blueprint. It also depends on their evolutionary state. But a 0-degree Mars can be new potential, that there's a drive for new potential with regards to self-discipline, self-accountability, self-responsibility. All of these are functions of Saturn and Capricorn. But when Saturn and Capricorn are devolved, when they're unawake, when they're in a more immature or low frequency iteration, Saturn and Capricorn can be hyper-controlling, cold, apathetic, cruel, etc. So for some people, this Mars at 0 degrees Capricorn ruled by Saturn with this easy kind of sextile relationship to Black Moon Lilith as part of the signature for the Mercury retrograde, which is the mind going back, doing reflection work into the past, into past projects and other things, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But the mind kind of moving into fantasy or indeed confusion, which is part of the functionality of Neptune. This Saturnian action set, easily connected and communicating with this devaluation narrative, can create two things. One, it can create a like immature controlling response from the patriarchy in order to demean, devalue, contain, erase, deny, etc. The other thing that this sextile is going to do, and for most of you listening to this particular recording, what I'm about to say is really the activation. This Mars at that 0 degree Capricorn Saturn point is quite positive for many people, because what that's going to do is it's going to bring a new impetus, a new drive, a new intention, a new passion to bring Saturnian maturation to the patriarchy, the political systems globally, the various social systems that are all crumbling and collapsing. There's going to be a new drive. And indeed, at 0 degrees, there's a new potential. So there's creativity inherent with the 0 degree Mars. Mars is our behavior, our action, our reaction, our passion, our drive. So there's a new Saturnian drive, a dedicated, focused drive. Saturn focuses. Ultimately, it wants to mature, and ultimately, too, it wants to progress. So there's a drive to progress some new narrative at 0 degrees. And with the sextile down here to this 5 degree Lilith, everybody, by the way, it's also sextiling the sun at 27 degrees. Okay? So it's sextiling the sun, but it's also sextiling this Black Moon Lilith. The sextile to Black Moon Lilith in Pisces says that there's a new driver that's wanting to attend to those within this living field here on planet Earth, humans and other than humans that live on this planet. There's a drive to attend to those that have been disenfranchised and devalued, which is very good. And the thing is, and I'll come back to this right now, what I mentioned before is this. This Mercury-Neptune will naturally bring forward a tendency for a lot of us to, number one, think to essentials when it comes to love, what we want in life. What is the ideal life that you as an individual want? What is it that you sought at once upon a time? Was there a time in your life that you lived some sort of ideal reality? What is it that you really seek spiritually? For me, the big narrative for my process for the last many months is peace. Peace. This has actually been for the last few years. But for the last few months, it's been very spotlighted, very highlighted. It's something that is simply the driving goal, is peace. Freedom, ease, but peace, peace. You know, a lot of people, they feed off of conflict. And at some level, that becomes boring, and it becomes futile, and it becomes, the clarity of the immaturity becomes hyper crystal clear. And so for a lot of people with this Mercury retrograde with Neptune, which also functions to showing us or having us resonant with the spiritual ideal. Neptune, Pisces. Neptune rules Pisces. Neptune and Pisces aligned with the 12th house. This is all the consciousness field, the source field, the ideal kind of, you know, prime material, prime archetypes, you know, these ideal realities, these ideal archetypal realities. For a lot of people, there's going to be a lot of creative emergence that comes through communications. Like I said, with Neptune, we're talking about videos, films, narratives, storylines, music, sound. There's creative ways of bringing narrative through. And a lot of it could be visual. Okay. So high-level psychic ability to see, for some people, it's definitely a discernment process though, because that Lilith creates a complexity, and that complexity can bring people into delusion about their non-value. So people can succumb. I think a lot of people, and I want all of you to hear this, if you currently suffer from depression, I want you to be really mindful over the next couple of months, because Lilith, Neptune on the mind in Pisces, this can tie people into the myths and the wounds and the patterning and the signatures from the past. And this can draw people into deep depression. This can draw people into narratives that say, I don't want to be tethered to this life anymore on this planet. So please, for those listening to my voice who have had issues with depression, please be mindful over the next 2 months. Again, especially because the signature has this square to the moon. So there's this kind of emotional desire for just truth, 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 inspiration and truth. And it's having a difficult relationship to the myth, the confusion, the deception, the delusion. And it all is tied to this Black Moon Lilith, the feminine who has been erased from history. So how have you erased your own feminine quality set? That's for you to do self-inquiry around. How have you denied or erased, devalued your own feminine quality sets? Emotionality, holistic seeing, right brain functioning, creative expression, compassion, empathy, intuitive wisdom, etc. Okay? So the healing comes with valuing exactly this point of Lilith. Okay? Now let's look at some of the symbology. Now, actually, before we do that, I'm going to go back. We're going to start here with the symbology, right? So I started by talking about what caught my eye, with this particular signature for this Mercury retrograde cycle. And what caught my eye was Venus at 10, the moon at 11, and Mercury at 12. 10, 11, and 12. So we're going to look at these symbols. Let's actually start with Venus. We're going to end with Mercury. Let's start with Venus. So let's move this over. And yeah, we'll just leave that like that. Okay. All right, everybody. So let me go ahead and we're going to go to Dean Rudyard's 10 to 11 Aries. Here we go. What do we have for Venus? Okay. So this is the position for Venus in Aries that is part of the signature for this couple of month process of Mercury retrograde. Okay. Or excuse me, 3-week process. I don't know why I'm saying 2 months. Why am I saying 2 months? Actually, I will share this with you. Before we talk about this, let me just share this with you. That's interesting that I went into the 2-month identification. Indeed, on the 5th or the 10th of May, let me look. The nodal point moves, everybody. The nodal point moves. So from this 18 months of the nodal axis being in Cancer, Capricorn, we're actually going to be moving into Gemini and Sag. And indeed, it's going to be happening on the 5th of May. So the interesting thing is this, as I'm talking to you about this Mercury retrograde process, which is only a few week process, I'm talking about 2 months out, which would put us really in April. What's going to happen in April? But it is right before that nodal axis shift, which is going to be intense, and I am going to talk about that in another video. Yeah, in April, at the end of April, on the 26th of April, Pluto goes retrograde. Pluto goes retrograde. And it'll go retrograde at 24 degrees. What is that? There might be something there, everybody. There's something there. Gosh, let me just think about this for a minute. There's something about Mercury's process connected to Pluto. What is that? I don't know what it is yet. Let's talk about the symbology, and I'm going to come back to that. There's something about Mercury's retrograded process. Well, you know what it is? It's about Lilith. That's what it is. It's about Lilith. Because again, this is like that which has been devalued, and that which is devalued is not empowered. It's not allowed to be empowered. Pluto is about stepping up into our power. It's about empowerment. It's also about potency with regards to narratives and indeed skill sets and what we need to transform. Pluto is many functions, but one of the functions is power. Power, and indeed the power and the destruction, because that's one of the functions obviously of Pluto as well, the destruction of the patriarchy that's playing out, certainly the destruction of the powers that are holding positions of power. The wealthy, for example, that are holding positions of power societally in our global civilization. But this is what it's about. This is what it's about, because the mind's delusion about disempowerment is being revisited. Keep in mind, whenever a planet appears to go retrograde, naturally it's a time of reflection and internalized processes. Naturally, it's a natural function of life in general, but certainly when the planets appear to go retrograde, It is kind of the solar system's process playing out at the macrocosmic scale. And so for us, the function as we hold Mercury within our psyche, it's our mental functioning. So this is a natural time for internalized reflection, assimilation, processing, kind of an allowance. It's also a revisiting. And so this revisiting of, for example, old projects or ventures or business ideas, creative ideas that you started to bloom at some point and then you left them. You're going to be coming back to some things. A lot of you are. But again, the connection to Lilith is the difficult aspect here, because all of us over the next 3 weeks ahead are going to be going through this kind of process of who are we? How powerful are we? Existentially, what is the story of our power? That's what it is. That's why I was talking about the next 2 months. So there might be some activations with Pluto that, who knows, I'll take a look and maybe I'll come back with another video on that. Now, let's take a look at Venus. So Venus at 10, then we're going to look at the moon, and finally we're going to look at Mercury. So 10 to 11 degrees, we're actually going up here. Wow, indeed. So look at what we have here. We have Venus with the narrative, the symbology of the ruler of a nation. I mean, it's very appropriate, simply because of all the activities going on in countries throughout the planet right now. The keynote, the power resulting from, and here I am, I was just talking about Pluto and power, and here we go. So the keynote, the power resulting from the formal integration of the collective desire for order. This is supposed to be formal, I think. This is a typo. This was a copied text. So the ruler of a nation, the power resulting from the formal integration of the collective desire for order. At this stage of the cyclic process, the symbol refers to the appearance of the personal ego as the central manifestation of a type of order which transcends and seeks to rule the emotional and instinctual drives of the individual person. Actually, the ruler at this social, political, and mental level of integration is often the one who is being ruled by collective pressures. Nevertheless, I'm going to just highlight this. Nevertheless, a desire for a larger type of integration has now emerged. It is no longer biological impulsive, which is Aries, the first degree, 0 to 1, or emotional personal, Aries, 6 degrees, but social, collective, and institutional. I have to tell you, everybody, this is exactly what I was just talking about with the Pluto, and Pluto going retrograde at the end of April, and indeed the 2 months that I kept referring to with Mercury. It has to do with power, and it has to do with the ruler of the nation, period. This is what it is, and this is indeed where we have Venus sitting. So this is what it's about. Psychologically speaking, actually, at this ego level, laws and the restrictive power of a police force are dominant features. Psychologically speaking, this means that the integrative principle is the limited, more or less narrow I am realization. It manifests itself as the personal ego exerting its will to control the reactions of the biopsychic organism. The ruler of a nation. Is it your desire or is it the collective's desire? Okay? This is the narrative that is here that you are rethinking. Spiritually, psychically, you are rethinking. You, as an empowered sovereign individual, you're rethinking things. You're rethinking the past narratives. You're thinking about your soul structure. For many of you, this will be a time aligned for you to understand your natal blueprint. Okay? This is about, I have to tell you, the other thing with all of these here in Pisces, naturally we are going through a karmic sort of a process over the next month. This retrograded mind in Pisces, along with Neptune and Lilith, is definitely speaking to karmic process. And when we're looking at, again, what I was drawn to with this Venus in Aries, with this ruler of a nation narrative here, what is it that we are valuing here? Are we valuing the Capricornian ruler of a nation, which is currently being destructed and recalibrated? Or are we valuing our own power? So there's thoughts happening about that, right? So this is the first stage. Let me go here. This is the first stage of the third fivefold sequence of the cyclic process. It indicates a centralization of power at the level of a rigidly structured consciousness. Now, for me, what this is saying is that there's going to be some challenge and confusion on behalf of many people when it comes to their mind, their thoughts, their thinking, their beliefs, what they're communicated from, like religious institutions, people of meaning to them, what they remember hearing, what they've absorbed as their own belief system. There's going to be belief. A lot of people are going to believe those things that they were taught. They're going to believe what they were taught to value in regards to the father, the patriarchy, the government, the political structures, the leaders, the kings. Okay? So that's what this is talking about here. For some of you, you're going to wake up, or you've already waken up, and this is a time over the next month for you to really identify how you are naturally powerful and empowered by your nature. And the ruler of the nation, in a way, is a myth, or at least the assigned characteristics that we've given him or her. Okay, so there's a lot of assimilation of reality. What's the delusion? What's the reality? Your value system is being rethought during this time frame. Okay, now Venus is trining the moon. Okay, so let's go to 11 to 12 Sagittarius. Venus trining the moon. What matters to us is truth. And 11 to 12. Very good. Very good. Okay. So the moon, the signature for this Mercury retrograde cycle. A flag turns into an eagle, the eagle into a chanticleer saluting the dawn. So this is like a rooster, announcing the day. The spiritualization and promotion of great symbols of a new age by minds sensitive to its precursory manifestations. In the background of this strange allegory, we can recognize the deep-seated belief that the American nation, this is specifically for those of you watching and listening who are my American friends, and indeed for those outside of the U.S. who certainly are engaged with the process happening with our political structure here in the U.S. It is fascinating, is it not, that we have the American nation specifically being called out here? I find that fascinating. So again, in the background of this strange allegory, we can recognize the deep-seated belief that the American nation and its basic democratic institutions were constituted to be the cradle for a new step in human evolution. The flag is the abstract symbol of the nation. It becomes an eagle, another U.S. symbol, when the concept is made alive by bold and transcendent action. The eagle symbolizes spiritual will and the power to rise to the highest possible altitude of consciousness and purpose. Flying at such an altitude, the eagle is the first living creature to perceive the rising sun. Having perceived it, it heralds it, and by so doing is identified with the coin Chanticleer, who had convinced himself that his resonant cry was responsible for the rise of the sun and the coming of a new day. The second stage symbol contrasts with the first in that it is completely future-oriented. It speaks of peak experiences instead of the wisdom found in the organismic death of the body consciousness. It urges us to bring our noblest ideals to actual life through the power of the spiritual will. The keyword might be annunciation. How amazing is the ruler of the nation and a recalibration, a rethinking, a deep seeing, a psychic seeing, a clarity, a navigation through some delusion, but certainly a rethinking when it comes to ideal realities here on this planet. And it's connected to the value system that we place to the ruler of the nation. The harmonic trine to this flag turning into an eagle, turning into a chanticleer, saluting the new day is beautiful, because this harmonic connection says that there's going to be a desire for the new day to come and to be announced. This is about the future. This is about a new future. Again, we have this square, however, and the square leads back to where we are headed, where we are going, and what this video is about, which is Mercury retrograde. So let's take a look, everybody. What is Mercury sitting at? We're looking at 12 to 13 degrees Pisces. All right. This is the Mercury point. This is the narrative living at that point of retrograde, stationing retrograde. An ancient sword used in many battles is displayed in a museum. Through the effectual use of his will, a consecrated man can become a symbol of courage for all those who follow in his footsteps. Willpower is the ultimate spiritual weapon, and its undeviating use is the certification of individual worth. Wherever found, the symbol emphasizes the imperative need to make use of the will in meeting the basic challenges of the inner life as well as outer adversaries. With this third symbol of the 69th sequence, we see singled out and strongly emphasized the one power in human, which is an assurance of victory in the contests generated by social or occult processes in which he has become an active part. The individual must use that willpower, yet it is not really his own which he operates at a spiritual level. It is God's will operating through his mind, which focuses its thrusts. Okay? So it's God's will, or let's call it the source's will, spiritual will, the truth, the psychic field, the consciousness field, the foundation. The foundation. Okay? This is the truth operating through the mind of the human, which focuses the impetences, the drivers. It is, occultly speaking, the power of the quote-unquote brotherhood, okay? The energy of the whole operating through the one-pointed individual who has made this whole aware of the need for its use in a particular situation. Now, let's get real with this for a minute, because what Mercury retrograde can do, especially for those individuals who operate in what I would call a very left-brained orientation, which is mostly expressive. It's about outward action. Mercury retrograde for people who are tightly left-brained can be difficult because the retrograde process obligates internal reflection, assimilation, adjustment, adaptation, maturation. This is about an evolutionary process of change, but it certainly requires stillness and quiet, reflection, contemplation. That's part of the retrograding mind's process. And for the tightly left-brained mind, oh boy, there's going to be a reaction to this, a rejection of this, especially with Lilith there, especially with Neptune there. This delusion of the disempowered. This is a lot of, I feel no power, so I'm going to project on you and you and you that you're not powerful. And this square to the moon being the righteous one to bring the new day, well, those of you listening might be able to understand that this can look like a lot of righteous people speaking their truths left and right. Online, in video, I have to tell you, this positioning here, a lot of you might realize that, videos now are being distributed that have been altered, right? So there's politicians from our past that are put in videos where the mouths are altered, the words are altered, and they're created videos, they're fake videos. And this very much speaks to that, especially with the square to the moon about the Chanticleer speaking the new day. For some people, this is going to be hyper ego taking place here. And this is going to be unethical behavior playing out for some. For others of you, high-level creativity. For others of you, high-level creativity outside of the moral ethic. Okay? And that's why this moral ethic here, like the ethos of Venus in Aries, ruled by Mars, this is fire here. This is masculine energy here. And the fact is that the ruler of the nation will be imbued with a lot of people's value, meaning people will value the rulers, the kings, or the ones attempting to be kings. Do you see? So there's going to be some activity in the next month that's going to be immature and devolved and deceptive and intentionally so, because it's outside of the norm of ethical balance. Okay? Now, for others of you, what this is talking about is courage that's going to be instigated. This is about stepping up into your power. Do you see? There's going to be two different iterations of how this is going to show up. Some people are purely in almost a projection mode, so they can't own where they don't feel empowered. They can't identify it. There's almost an inability for some people to actually even know what it is that their process is or what they are going through within the psyche. So it's all about projection. For some people, this is going to be this kind of willed in God names projection. For others of you, this is I'm finding my power, and I understand that the love within the source field is speaking through me. And that's when the psychic intuition and the creative impetus really is going to come through. Okay. Is there anything else I wanted to speak to here? Let me just look at and see if there's anything else. Let's look at this 0 point for Mars, actually. Let's pull that up. So 0 for Mars, 0 to 1 degree Capricorn. Let's look at that Mars. Because, like I said earlier, that same day on the 16th, Mars moves into a new process. So here we are, everybody. Mars, an Indian chief claims power from the assembled tribe, right? The power, again, power and responsibility implied with any claim for leadership. This is Mars. So as Mercury goes retrograde, the energy of the day the energy of the start of this Mercury process will be imbibed with this narrative. The energy will be an Indian chief claims power. So let's read this. The power and responsibility implied in any claim for leadership. The religious ideal implied in the preceding symbol has now materialized or crystallized into sheer power. The power to lead the community and to ensure its welfare or even its physical survival. The energies released through group cooperation, Libra, deepened and emotionally experienced as forces of great potency, Scorpio, and given meaning and conscious purpose, Sagittarius, are now stabilized and hierarchized. The power of the group is turned into a measurable and carefully managed capital. The words chief and capital come from the same Latin word caput, meaning head. A time comes in many lives when the individual finds himself or herself placed in a situation that allows to assume power over comrades, however limited this power may be. Is he or she ready to do this effectively and responsibly? This is the supreme test of human in society. It complements its polar opposite, summer solstice degree, which refers to the acceptance by the individual of a new kind of allegiance as a foundation for the integration of his mature personality. Such a foundation may, but may not, refer to establishing a home. This represents the first stage in a fivefold process, the 55th sequence of 5 symbols. 5, 5, 5. This is about change. Inherently, this particular cycle of actionable growth connected to the mind's reinterpreting and reanalyzing and going deep into existential truths at this time, it's about change. Changing of the guard, changing of the systems in our society. 5, 5, 5. Okay. It refers to the capacity latent in every individual to claim and assume authority in a vital group situation. Couldn't be a better place to land, everybody. Why? Because indeed, that note about Pluto's change or retrograde change at the end of April is indeed part and parcel to this almost preparatory time frame that the mind, with possible confusion and the power narrative really being existentially identified and worked on. Karmically, there's going to be, I feel like a lot of you are going to be almost reviewing your life, thinking about your life, thinking about how far you've come, thinking about the patterns of wounding, the things that have been struggles or obstacles, quote unquote, because there's function in all of that. Do you know what those functions are? But there's going to be almost a life in review process, specifically because we're talking about Mercury in Pisces, connected to all these other narratives here. Empowerment, the power of the societal heads and your power are definitively the narratives at play here. It's a big time. Beautiful. I'm going to leave it there, everybody. I'm going to put this back up. For those of you interested in connecting in and understanding your natal chart analysis, your blueprint, this is about understanding who you are, why you are, what your patterns are. This is the story of your life, the narratives that are encoded, the energetics that are encoded. When we look at your blueprint, we're looking at your psyche. We're looking at what runs you, what governs you, and what the natural narrative is. So then you can cease resisting your narrative. When people sit in suffering or they sit in stuckness, it's resisting their narrative. It's resisting it. It's judging it as wrong and bad versus actually understanding that there is functionality in it and there's an allowance to going with that flow with least effort. That's part of your life journey. It's encoded in your life journey. All right, everybody. I send you much love and support for this Mercury retrograde cycle and indeed this Mars through Capricorn cycle. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.